Hello, everybody. It is May 8th, 2026, here in the United States of America. I hope everyone out there is having a fantastic week. In this video, I'd like to talk a little bit about what the average citizen of any given civilization or country actually desires from their government first and foremost, and why attempting to sell anything other than that when those more pressing concerns aren't being addressed or those needs aren't being met is a recipe for civil and social unrest. And this is something that I think is very relevant to the United States today because we seem to have a political class that is almost entirely disconnected from the average citizen. They have what they perceive to be their loyal voter base, and that is really all they care to pander to. The average citizens' needs and concerns are usually ignored as long as they have a section of their potential voter base fervently cheering them on. They don't really seem to be concerned about much else. I would say this is something the Republican Party is really a trap. The Republican Party is falling deeply into. Something that really, I think, inspired me to make this video was something that Senator Lindsey Graham actually just said, I believe, last week. So he was being pressed on the Iran war and asked several questions about the subject. Now, there is a very large contingent of Americans at the moment that are very concerned with skyrocketing gas prices on top of already skyrocketing energy prices, food prices. Everyone's insurance premiums are going up. Costs of anything you can imagine don't seem to be going down. They just seem to be going up. Cars are getting more and more expensive. It's hard to find a new vehicle for a reasonable price, something reliable. Housing prices are still seemingly going through the roof. There's a house down the road from me that I know 10 years ago wouldn't have sold for anything more than $150,000. It is on the market now for well over $300,000. It's pretty insane. It's not even that big of a house, but in my area, houses are fairly cheap compared to other places in the country, and many houses now are being sold for well over $300,000. And I know that local wages haven't really gone up very much. But anyways, back to Lindsey Graham. So one thing he said when pressed about the Iran war was, well, Iran was 2 weeks away from getting a nuke, and this is something we've heard for decades now. Iran is perpetually 2 weeks away from getting a nuke, despite the fact that every single one of our intelligence agencies have said over and over again that, well, they might have the expertise maybe to pull it off. They don't seem to be actually seeking one now at the moment. But I'm not going to get into all that here. But what Lindsey Graham essentially said was, well, this is something you should be concerned with, and if you're not concerned with it and you're not willing to pay $5 plus a gallon for gas, then you don't deserve to drive, as if the average concern of the everyday American citizen should be what's happening in a foreign power, or happening between two foreign powers on the other side of a planet in a region that we have, not just me, but a region that that many Americans have practically begged our government to extricate itself from for quite some time. The amount of blood and treasure we've spent in the region doesn't really seem worth the squeeze. A lot of people feel that way. And yet Lindsey Graham is speaking to Americans as if their first and foremost concern should be a hypothetical. Well, what if this particular country 6,000 miles away gets a nuclear weapon? They're 2 weeks away from it, and this should be your first concern. I know you're having a hard time saving money. I know you're having a hard time buying groceries. I know that this is putting a financial strain on working class families, but this is what you should be concerned about. Now, how that comes off to the average citizen is nothing short of gaslighting. It comes off as something abusive, something detached. The average person's concerns, first and foremost, above all else, are being able to feed their families, not being stressed constantly about money, not being stretched paycheck to paycheck. They want to be able to save, put some money away for emergencies, not have to use their credit cards. They want to have a bit of a buffer within their checking account so they're not constantly seeing how much money they have left in it every time they make a purchase. Americans want to be comfortable. They want to feel safe and secure financially. They want to be able to get certain repairs done to their homes. They want to be able to fix their cars. Like, this is what people are concerned with. It's their immediate surroundings and the concerns that actually directly affect their day-to-day life, not something happening overseas. And the way this war is being sold to the American people isn't garnering support for it. It's creating animosity towards Republican politicians and towards our current president, since the Republicans do control the House, the Senate, the presidency, and arguably the Supreme Court. Americans that voted for them are expecting certain concerns to be addressed. Now, the Republicans ran on a platform of America first, putting American citizens first above all else, addressing their concerns above all else, lowering costs, making it easier to get housing, improving the economy, improving job prospects for the average person. Like, this is what the expectation was when we went in the office. And politicians run on these things because they know that's the people's first concerns. So when they get into office and they don't address those concerns, people tend to get frustrated and they tend to become angry. Regardless of what anyone say, okay, there are several groups in America that are concerned with what Iran does on a day-to-day basis. I would say evangelical Christians that fervently support Israel, conservative Jews that fervently support Israel, and the Iranian diaspora. These are the three main groups that seem to have the most, and not just conservative Jews, some liberal Jews as well, but these are the groups that tend to be the ones that are completely and fully in support of intervention when it comes to Iran, regardless of the personal cost they might face. They see this as a crusade worth fighting. Now, that those several groups of people actually don't make up the majority of Americans. Now, it's a very loud part of the Republican voter base, which I think gives some of these politicians enough comfort to be able to say things like Lindsey Graham just said, because the assumption is, well, this is something the average American wants anyways, and they trust us and they know that we're going to get the job done, and this is a serious personal concern of his, so therefore it must be the serious personal concern of anyone who thinks like him. But I think the disconnect the Republican Party seems to have with much of the country is that they don't really seem to be in tune with the direction politically that this country is actually heading. I think the MAGA movement was a pretty big indicator that much of this country's working class and anyone that's not a boomer is moving more towards some form of populism. They're becoming less and less attached to like traditional causes that America has attached itself to within the Middle East. They're becoming less and less attached to this alliance with the nation of Israel. They're becoming more open to things like taxing corporations. They're becoming more cognizant that something is seriously wrong with our healthcare system. They're becoming very disillusioned and frustrated with mass immigration, even if it's legal, because job prospects aren't that great for many Americans, especially in tech, with so many things being outsourced. They're becoming very disillusioned with the prospect of getting involved in foreign wars, considering that America has struggled for the past 50 or 60 years to justify itself getting involved in any kind of foreign entanglements. Vietnam was left undone. The country fell to the communists. It's still under communist rule to this day. The Iraq war was seen as something that was a very costly waste of time and lives. The intervention in Afghanistan, same thing. The Taliban now rule the country regardless of our efforts for the last 20 years. So I think Americans have become pretty sick and tired of the status quo presented by the ruling elite in both parties. And as long as those ruling elite continue to ignore this trend and continue to ignore the concerns of their average citizens, they're going to be seen as an aloof ruling class completely detached from the needs of their own citizens. Now, traditionally, if you look at human history, once that happens and once that leadership class becomes so detached from the average citizen of that civilization to the point where that citizen feels like they really have nothing left to lose, that they're going to be in a continuous cycle of being let down, abused, and having things pushed upon them that are not to their own benefit than something gives. I think in America, that is usually done through the ballot box. Not saying that some kind of major civil conflict can't happen in the United States again. It could, but I think things have to get much, 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 much worse for something like that to happen. People need to become much, much less comfortable than they are now to be willing to put themselves in a situation where they could, suffer to that degree. But I think one thing that can happen, especially in 2026 and 2028, is the Republican Party could face a massive. I don't think people are necessarily going to vote Democrat because they don't see that as a good alternative. They actually see that as a worse alternative to the Republicans. But at worst, I think many voters will choose to stay home to punish the party. I think the only real reason that so many people even vote Republican this day is because the alternative is seen as something that much worse. I think that's why Lindsey Graham tends to win his races within his home state, because there is no real good alternative for many people to somebody like Lindsey Graham, which if the Democrats were smart, they would actually take advantage of this and remoderate themselves back to the Democrats, to the Democratic Party of the 1990s. I think if they were actually able to do that and jettison all this, woke nonsense and actually present themselves as a party that puts the concerns of American citizens and American workers above all else, above foreign entanglements, a party that's actually willing to address the growing disparity between rich and poor in this country. If they manage to steer the ship in a direction that makes the party look like it actually does address the concerns of the average American citizen, then I think the Republican Party faces some pretty serious issues moving forward. They're going to have to finally forcefully steer the party towards outright populism, or they just won't win elections. Sorry, they can't rely on old conservative Fox News viewing boomers forever. But I don't think the Democratic Party can manage that. I think they have tied their wagons to this radical base that they have within their party that's for open borders, that's for no standards or rules or ethics when it comes to things like gender and sexuality. I think that even if they wanted to reposition the party to a more moderate position, they have such a dedicated, fervent, and potentially violent and angry voter base that I don't really think they can afford to do that either. So they're kind of stuck. So we're sort of in this situation now where the Republican Party seems to be, regardless of the MAGA movement, has seemed to redirect itself back towards being the late 90s, early 2000s party of the average American boomer. And the Democratic Party seems to be stuck on a track where it is going to perpetually be the woke revolutionary party. So that leaves a very, very, very large contingent of Americans now that really feel that their concerns, which are being able to feed their families, afford to pay their taxes, to be able to save money, to afford to buy a home, to be able to build a family, like this section of the population that has these concerns is just growing and growing and growing. And eventually something has to give. If this country's leadership cannot provide basic necessities and a level of comfort to their citizens, and things just keep getting worse and worse and worse, then the political structures that America has currently, I don't think we'll see the end of the century. I think there might be some kind of mass, I want to say restructuring, and I'm not somebody who says that civil war is on the horizon, at least not quite yet. But there will be some kind of reckoning in this country as these issues just fester worse and worse and worse. And I think Trump was seen as somebody who was actually going to come in, upend the system, and really fix things. Well, it turns out that doesn't seem to be the case, which adds to this growing frustration that people have. They have really nowhere to turn. And I think 2026 and 2028 are going to be very difficult years for the Republican Party if they can't manage to get their messaging on track and can't manage to actually present themselves as a party that is going to legitimately put the concerns of its own citizens first. There just is not a good way to sell the Iran war and the situation in the Strait of Hormuz to the average American. Okay, if you look at our national consciousness, I'm sorry, but Iran doesn't occupy our national consciousness like some of these politicians think that it does, or it should. It's a country 6,000 miles away. The Iranian diaspora here isn't very big. The conservative evangelical movement isn't what it used to be in this country. It doesn't have the influence that it once had. I'm sorry, just Persians aren't seen as some kind of great civilizational adversary to the United States, and many people are just fatigued of being involved in the Middle East to begin with. They view many of the problems that we face in the Middle East as something of our own doing, and they would be generally correct in that assertion. Much of the groups that we've actually spent time fighting in the region are groups that were either directly or indirectly built by United States foreign policy. The current Iranian regime exists as a reaction to the fact that the old Iranian government was overthrown, replaced with the Shah. The Shah proved to be very unpopular and was replaced by this current government. And this is also a government we actually gave weapons to in the past, despite the fact we were also arming Iraq. The Taliban exist mostly because we armed the Mujahideen against the Soviets. Osama bin Laden used to be a CIA asset, and so on and so forth. These various groups in the Middle East have sprung up, various revolutionary groups, like I said, were either direct or indirect creations of American foreign policy, and the average person knows this. So you cannot sell this war above their own personal concerns in regards to their finances and their family. It's just not going to work. And doubling and tripling and quadrupling down on this is not going to make the situation better. The current crop of American leaders had better wrap this up quickly before costs get worse. Something needs to be done now because, again, the average citizen's concern is what is happening in their own bank account and within their own home, first and foremost, and you cannot convince them otherwise. And that's not just this country. That's across the world. It's just common sense governance. But anyways, that's all I really wanted to talk about in this video today. I hope everyone out there has a good rest of your week. I will be back. I will be back Saturday, which is tomorrow, with another video. I was thinking it was Thursday for some reason. It's clearly not. It's Friday. But I'll be back tomorrow with another video. And I hope everyone out there has a good night, and see you then.